and welcome to Bend the Knee, a Song of Ice and Fire podcast. I am Sir Matt, the Bud Knight.
And I am Sir Ezra, the Watchful. Welcome to our Song of Ice and Fire book club. Welcome to one of the craziest episodes I think I've ever been involved in.
Yeah, so, I am here on vacation with Sir Ezra. We have been doing a ton of behind-the-scenes work.
Yeah.
And, recently we had, because I read all the reviews on iTunes, and we had a review on iTunes where it was really positive when somebody said, if I had to give these guys a criticism, I don't want to be nitpicky, but it seems like they focus a lot of time on very specific characters, Lady Stoneheart, Bloodraven, Threadcrow, and I brought this up to Sir Ezra, and I was like, that's a pretty valid argument. So he said, okay, let's kind of have fun and do an episode on a character we don't talk a lot about. And let's do it's a pretty popular theory. I know All Shift X has done a video on it. I've seen it quite a bit in the Reddit forums. I know I've seen it in the World of Ice and Fire forums, and that is the bolt-on theory. It's the Roose Bolton. Is he a vampire? Is he does he wear people's skin to make himself immortal? And there's somebody actually brought up this specific Reddit post to us a while back and sent us a raven about it. And yeah. I had it saved. I don't have the person's name, but so again, we just finished watching the Alt Shift X video as well, and so we're familiar. I'm familiar with it, but I've never really done a deep dive into it.
Well, I definitely have never done a deep dive into it, and when you first hear about it, it's sort of like, what? Right. And just know that this is really a for fun episode.
Yeah, it's totally
because
for fun, yeah.
It is full disclosure, 3:00 in the morning,
mm-hmm.
and Sir Matt is headed back west tomorrow. So we were like, what can we do in a short amount of time that would be sort of a filler kind of stand-in until we get back to the main recording,
right? And the only thing crazier we could have done is the Is Varys a Merman episode, which we will get to at some point.
I was to say, don't count it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, can I just, before you?
But this is a theory I've actually wanted to tackle.
I do remember you bringing it up to me at one point. I do remember you saying this, and when we got the Raven about it, and people were talking about it, I was like, oh, okay, cool, kind of interesting, and it went to the back burner. We never discussed it, probably because I'm having the same reaction that I'm having right now, which is sort of like, what?
Right.
So. Just as a quick, Roose Bolton is not someone we typically discuss.
Yeah.
He's not. So that kind of fits in with this whole idea that we would want to talk about different characters. And I do want to say we gravitate towards our favorite characters.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So like you watch people in the group interact with each other, and people know that Lady Stoneheart, Beric Dondarrion, and those characters are my favorite. So in the future, I think talking about Varys would be cool. Talking about Roose Bolton now is gonna be interesting. Marwyn the Mage, someone I want to talk more about. I've talked about Quaithe before, so I better stop talking about her. Although I think she, I had a big post in Facebook the other day about what did that amount to. But yeah, so this is just again purely for fun. And the more I read it, Sir Matt was watching my face as I was watching the Alt Shift X theory on this, and I was sort of like. Okay.
He makes a point.
One point. Now, the other thing, too, that I thought was key, because after I was midway through this, I go back to, it is the bolt on, right?
Right.
The Bolton theory. Mm-hmm. Bolt on. And why that name, right? So you talk about, like, why does George pick a name? Why does he name his character Bolton? Okay, is there a reason for that? Because when we talk about... the Martells, Doran Martell, right? We talk about that meaning. There's some origin to that, and it meaning death.
Right.
So he does pick names for a reason, and there's something behind the reason why he does that too. Mm-hmm. So not to be underestimated in just the title of the theory itself.
Right.
So okay.
And one of the things All Shift X says before we begin is he says he's this. The main idea in this theory, he says, just keep in mind, this is also a world where we have skin changers, wargs, dragons,
oh man,
frozen men, giants,
right,
children of the forest who have lived forever, people who wear each other's faces, just all that stuff exists.
Yeah, green seers, yeah, oh yeah,
absolutely,
yep.
So the bolt-on theory got a lot of attention recently. This is from Megatron, McLarge, Huge.
It's a great name.
Great name. The bolt-on theory got a lot of attention recently, but cited little evidence. So this is a Reddit thread. A thread a few days ago attacked it, and I'm going to defend part of it. Specifically, the Roose Bolton is undead. The parts of it about him being the Night's King and flaying a son to wear his skin are interesting. He says, although there's not a lot of evidence. So he says anyway.
Sure.
Let's start with the taxonomy of magical creatures in the books. We have dragons. We have zombies, which is kind of like wights. We have werewolves. We have wargs and direwolves. He says we even have a Frankenstein and a monster with Qyburn and Robert Strong, or just the mountain, in the show. Out of the standard monsters, that leaves vampires unaccounted for. The modern concept of a vampire starts with Dracula, a book inspired by the real life of Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century prince in what is now Romania. A quick note, if you don't read any further, Vlad was eventually captured and his captors forged a letter in his name. Then he provides some info on Vlad the Impaler. And I, as a history guy, I'll just tell you a little bit about him. Vlad the Impaler was an absolute boss. Okay, so in 15th century, it's the Ottoman Empire, and he is fighting for the kingdom of Walchuria, which is now part of Romania. It was kind of 3 separate regions back in the day, and his dad was actually in this super awesome group called the Order of the Dragons. And what ends up happening is there's like the Ottoman Turks and all this stuff, and he ends up having like kind of serving as like a ward there for a while.
Yeah.
And he ends up coming back, leading this kind of revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, they're a tiny kingdom against an enormous empire, and so he can't necessarily, fend them off. So what he does is he does some really cool things. At some point, the Ottomans send these men to to send I can't remember if it's a treaty or whatever. And what he does is, to spite them, he tells them to remove their hats. And that's like, this is how you should do that here, and it's part of their custom. They don't do that, so he had their hats nailed to their heads and like sent them back. He's known as Vlad the Impaler because he would basically take trees or posts and turn them into enormous spikes, enormous spikes, and he would take his enemies and he would like basically run their bodies through, and so you would see just like essentially forest of he was crazy.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. In his kingdom, he had such fear, and he was so feared that he would he left like a golden chalice or a golden watch or something on like the town square, and nobody ever took it out of sheer fear of what would happen. Dude's a boss. So then at some point he ends up he would like, when the Ottomans start marching in, he would basically destroy his own towns, because the idea is like, well, you're not going to have them.
Okay.
And so he would like poison the water and stuff like that. And at one point he ends up getting captured. He's like in a cell, and he it's kind of rumored, he was drinking blood, and he was really pale, and like drinking blood of rats and all this kind of stuff. And so anyway, Bram Stoker ends up kind of using him as a reference for this Dracula character, and Vlad Dracul was kind of his name, and that's kind of where that character of Dracula ends up coming from. You should do some research on it, because Vlad the Impaler is super cool. He's a super cool guy to read about.
Yeah, I definitely want to know more about him now. Didn't you used to play a game that was what was that game you used to play that was like had vampires and stuff in it? Remember that game? I just thought it was
Blood Rain, or
no, Castlevania? Was it?
Castlevania. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Castlevania, which is stemmed off of Dracula and stuff like that. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Castlevania games. Yeah. So okay. So anyway, so he says first, just to justify invoking Vlad the Impaler, remember Shira Seastar. Egg says she bathes in blood to keep her beauty. Now there's also the Lostums,
who doesn't, right?
Right, the Lostums. We did the episode on the Lostums Shield,
yeah,
and they're kind of had some vampire ties. Their house sigil is a bat,
right? Yeah.
He says this is an obvious allusion to the second most famously cruel European noble, Elizabeth Bathory. The case led to legendary accounts against the Countess bathing in blood of virgins to retain her youth, and subsequently also to comparison with Vlad the Impaler of Volturia, on whom the fictional Count Dracula is partly based. That's from Wikipedia, kind of about Dracula.
Right.
And if proof is needed that wargs, direwolves, are intentionally reminiscent of werewolves, it's here. He says, when Stark changed into a wolf, his Northermen did the same. The mark of the beast was on them all. Wargs birth other wargs with a bite. It is well known. It was all my brothers and I could do to put them down before they slew us all. Jared Frey lying about the Red Wedding when Davos calls him out.
Yeah, lying about the Red Wedding. It is known.
Yeah. Vampires are animated corpses, immortal and hard to kill. They're pale, they drink blood, they don't eat, and they're killed by fire, amongst other things. Interestingly, one of the things that drives them away in legend is a stem of wild roses. Considered holy by reference to Jesus' crown of thorns, but reminiscent of the blue roses of Winterfell.
Okay.
We know one of the undead characters in the books, Cold Hands. He's quite different than he says Uncat.
Lady Stoneheart.
Lady Stoneheart and Beric Dondarrion. So let's assume they're different types of undead. Specifically, Cold Hands, like Whites, can't pass through warding. The difference is probably that he doesn't have a soul. So what is Cold Hands like? Cold Hands was the name that the fat boy Sam had given him. For through the ranger's face was pale, his hands were black and hard as iron, and cold as iron too. The direwolf did not like the way that Cold Hands smelled: dead meat, dry blood, a faint whiff of rot, and cold all over. Sometimes Cold Hands closed his eyes, but Bran did not think he slept. The scarf over his mouth, it never gets all hard with ice, like Hodor's beard. Not even when he talks. Mira gave him a sharp look. You're right. We never see his breath, have we? He does not eat, Bran remembered, and he fears the flames. His voice rattled in his throat, as thin as gaunt as he was. That's all from stuff from Dance of Dragons.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about Roose Bolton. First, his appearance sounds a bit like a corpse. His eyes were curiously pale, almost without color, and his look disturbing. That's from a Game of Thrones. He had a plain face, beardless and ordinary, notably only for his queer pale eyes, neither plump, thin, nor muscular. Only his eyes moved. They were very pale, the color of ice. From A Clash of Kings. Arya brought Lord Bolton a damp washcloth to wipe down his soft, hairless body. A Clash of Kings. Now remember, that is if you were kind of new to the books here. In the show, Arya is Tywin Lannister's kind of cupbearer, but in the books, it's actually Roose Bolton. So we get a lot more of Roose Bolton in those chapters. Next, his voice is repeatedly described as soft, similar to Cold Hands. Roose Bolton's voice was so soft that the men had to strain to hear it, so his chambers were always strangely hushed. From Clash of Kings, Roose Bolton spoke so softly that men quieted to hear him. Sword of Swords. Roose Bolton's eyes were paler than stone, darker than milk, and his voice was spider soft. His voice was a whisker above a whisper.
Yeah, so in recap, for me anyways, so you're comparing, this person's trying to make the case that Roose Bolton is undead.
Right.
Sort of by comparing his description to Cold Hands, in that he appears to be corpse-like, and he has a very soft voice, kind of like Cold Hands, and that maybe it's not, the strength there and the voice is,
right.
Gone. Okay. All right.
So it says he associates he associates with the necromancer Qyburn. Now the interesting part, Cold Hands. Once the heart had ceased to beat, a man's blood runs down into his extremities, where it thickens and congeals. His hands and feet swell up and turn as black as pudding. The rest of him becomes as white as milk. Roose Bolton is also known as the Leech Lord. He gets himself leeched frequently to remove the bad blood. The Lord's bedchamber was crowded when she entered. Qyburn was in attendance, and dour Walton in his mail shirt and greaves, plus a dozen Freys, all brothers, half-brothers, and cousins. Roose Bolton lay abed, naked. Leeches clung to the inside of his arms and his legs and dotted his pallid chest, long translucent things that turned a glistering pink as they fed. Bolton paid them no more mind than he did Arya. The pale man in the bed smelled faintly as the leeches nursed of his blood. I am not a man to be undone, sir. Clash of Kings. Roose Bolton from A Clash of Kings. Frequent leeches are the secret to a long life. A man must purge himself of bad blood. So to spell it out, the theory is that Roose is dead and has frequent leeches to remove the bad blood that would congeal in his extremities.
Okay. So, yeah, like cold hands, they describe.
Doesn't have that.
He's not leeching. So
Right.
if he were leeching, then maybe we wouldn't see all
And
that.
like when you look
blood.
look at possibly the mountain in when he fights Sandor Clegane at the end. I mean, he's like looks all kinds of jacked up.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Cubs still have that soft fur, my lord. One of his men pointed out. Make you a nice warm pair of gloves. Also, the Starks won't want to remind us winter is coming. Have it done. After Roose hunts wolves at Harrenhal, he ends up getting a pair of gloves made. Perhaps he has, wait for it, cold hands. Okay, that's kind of ridiculous. Okay,
That's funny.
he says, this is a cold man, Catelyn realized, not for the first time. He says, Roose is described as having an unusual smell, as was Cold Hands. A big deal is made of him drinking Hippocras and hardly eating. Roose Bolton has a sweeter smell to him, yet no more pleasant. He sipped Hippocras in preference to wine or mead and ate but little from A Storm of Swords. When he does eat, however, there's more focus on the blood than the meat. Another thing from A Storm of Swords here. Roose Bolton cut his meat methodically, the blood running across his plate. The Lord of the Dreadfort sopped up some of the blood with a chunk of bread. Perhaps he's drinking the spice wine to restore his color after the leechings, so he doesn't look too pale. Or maybe the spice wine is sometimes blood. He's strangely obsessed with Arya not spilling a drop. Now, the rest of the bolt on theory, if Roose is undead and immortal, is he the Night King? Here's Old Nan's story. So, I mean, before we even get to that, I will say that I'm not a big believer in the he's the Night King theory, but I'll still kind of read it here for context, because some people kind of believe that there is some tie to the Night King, or that he's an other based upon the color of his eyes.
Yeah, and so just before you read this Old Nan bit, the idea that isn't this the 13th Lord Commander? The idea that he mated with one of the female others or whatever,
right?
Someone who was pale and had the eyes and such. So, and I think to make this simplified, I know you're going to read it, but like the idea is that he's immortal.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bit that's coming, is that he's not just undead. He's been around for a long time. Which, yeah, we'll get into my qualms with that. But anyways, just on the first part though, the whole drinking spiced wine to bring color back to his face, and the leeching and things like that, and Arya not spilling a drop. I mean, yeah, it's just a bit of a stretch for me still, but
right. Okay, let's
finish it.
Okay. And this guy even goes on to say he doesn't really necessarily believe this part of it. Yeah, this part of it. But okay, so he had been the 13th man to lead the Night's Watch. She said, "This is an Old Nan tale. A warrior who knew no fear, and that was the fault in him." She said, "For all men must know fear. A woman was his downfall. A woman glimpsed from atop the wall, with skin as white as the moon and her eyes like blue stars. Fearing nothing, he chased her and caught her and loved her. Through her skin, though her skin was cold as ice, and when he gave his seed to her, he gave his soul as well. He brought her back to the Nightfort and proclaimed her a queen and himself the king. And with strange sorceries, he bound his sworn brothers to his will. For 13 years, they had been ruled Night King and his corpse queen, till finally the Stark of Winterfell and Jormungand of the Wildlings had joined to free the Watch from bondage. After his fall, when it was found that he had been sacrificing to the others, all records of the Night's King had been destroyed, his very name forbidden. Some say he was a Bolton, Old Nan would always end. Some say a Magnar out of Skagos. Some say Umber, Flint, or Norre. Some would have you think he was a Woodfoot from them who ruled Bear Island before the Ironmen came. He never was. He was a Stark, the brother of the man who brought him down. She always pinched Bran on the nose, and he would never forget it. He was a Stark of Winterfell. And who can say? Mayhaps His name was Brandon. Mayhaps he slept in the very bed in this very room. No, Bran thought, but he walked in this castle where we'll sleep tonight. Okay, you don't necessarily need to read the rest. It is important that she says mayhaps there. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay.
So he goes on to say, there are two main problems with Roose being the Night's King. Old Nan says he was a Stark, and the Night's King was defeated. Old Nan does say mayhaps, though, a sign of lying at least among the phrase. She doesn't say it about after the Stark part, granted, but if the Bolton theory is true, a Stark can wear a Bolton skin as easily as and vice versa. There's one hint from Roose that defeated kings aren't always killed. Roose Bolton in A Storm of Swords. After war, there's always a peace, and with the peace, there are pardons. For the Robb Starks, at least, not for the likes of Vargo Hoat. Perhaps Roose burning books at Harrenhal was somehow related to the destruction of the Night King's records. The rest of the Bolton theory is a guess at how a single Bolton could live thousands of years without attracting suspicion. The flayed skin are a Chekhov's gun waiting to go off, and it's a clever guess. The Lord of the Rings trilogy chronicled the end of the Age of Magic and the beginning of the Age of Men. A Song of Ice and Fire tells us the return of magic after a long decline, the secular houses having largely been destroyed in the War of the Five Kings. Comic book heroes are born to fight muggers and die battling gods who devour universes. Don't be surprised to see legendary figures return as the books try to surpass anything we've seen so far. From Melisandre here. The great other, whose name may not be spoken, the Lord of Darkness, the Soul of Ice, the God of Night and Terror. Ours is a choice between Baratheon and Lannister, between Greyjoy and Stark. It is death we choose, or life, darkness or light. So he ends up going on here. The last little bit here, he even talks about the biting of necks. This kind of vampire theory. This is from Dany's. It says the Undying are described as having some of Roose's traits. They actually even try to bite Dany's neck from Clash of Kings. Through the indigo murk, she could make out the wizened features of the Undying one to her right and the old man, wrinkled and hairless. Could it be that the Undying ones were dead? Her answer was a whisper as thin as a mouse whisker. We live, 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 it sounded. Myriad other voices whispered echoes, and no, 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 no. She could not move. Even her heart had ceased to beat. She felt a hand on her bare breast, twisting her nipple. Teeth found the soft skin of her throat. A mouth descended on one eye, licking, sucking, biting.
So what does that mean? So they're kind of saying.
I think it's just adding to the case of something that is similar to vampires.
Yeah, the Undying. Yeah, that was an edit. Yeah, to the original post, it looks like, or something. So yeah. All right. Well, I mean, so, there are. So we were also watching
the All Shift X video.
And guys, I'm really, you know me. You send me a raven, you send me a crow. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna read it,
right?
And I'm gonna try to figure out a way to make it work.
Right.
That's what I do. And so there are faceless men. There are people who skin change and warg and stuff like that. And there is a power in that. I mean, you can take Jack and Hagar as they would switch faces and completely change his his characteristics and stuff like that. And almost sometimes you think about Varys, remember when he shows up in that last chapter to Eddard and he's sort of completely, I mean, that's some of it's a mummer show or whatever, but it's a pretty darn good one, So I don't know. I mean, would he just be the bit that really we didn't really get into here was the eyes, in that he would keep the same
eyes.
The same eyes. So the original theory, the bolt-on theory, let me see real quick if I can pull it up. So basically, here we go. The idea is that Ramsay, the reason he keeps Ramsay around is because of his pale eyes. That's sort of the original bolt-on theory, and that why would he keep a son who he doesn't like around, who is killing people and things like that? And it's because, well, I may need him later. I will take his skin. I will become Ramsay Bolton. Now, and he's as much as he's pissed at maybe Ramsay for killing his first son or poisoning him, his legitimate son, he keeps his bastard son because he doesn't have
Right.
anyone else,
He
another
also
heir.
he doesn't seem to be in a rush to have another heir. I mean, think about
Yeah.
Walder Frey. Walder Frey's spitting out heirs every, like 10 minutes. And it's, it seems like, did you really try to? I mean, it seems like think about how old Ramsay is. I mean, you think he would have tried to have more kids by now.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's sort of like, let's say Roose Bolton's eyes are this pale gray, and he needs someone else who looks somewhat like needs that physique to be similar, I guess. If you're going to wear someone else's face, and maybe he's not truly got the art of the faceless man down or knows what Varys knows to kind of disguise himself, but when picking a spouse or whatever, he would want to make sure that those character traits come out the right way.
Right.
That he has a son who has pale eyes, that he could then take his skin, and then he's going to keep his own eye color, which is pale.
Yeah.
So that's the other layer to that.
Right.
I think.
So do you think? So I guess I'll go ahead and say I don't find the idea that that taking someone else's skin and wearing it and possibly changing your identity is far-fetched, even for the game, even for A Song of Ice and Fire whatsoever. I mean, we see it with the Faceless Man. I mean, we flat out have a group of assassins that sole purpose is literally cutting off other people's faces so that you can continue killing other people and using it as a disguise. So, I mean, it's not far-fetched whatsoever, considering that you have the Faceless Men who specifically engage in that exact in that exact thing. And the Faceless Men, really, it seems like they change their face, but they also we don't entirely know that they can change their almost appearance. It seems like they kind of go with people who are similar. The Boltons are people, they flay people, right? So and then they also, it's said that they sometimes wear their skins as cloaks. So it is entirely possible that throughout the centuries of flaying people, they have come across this power that they could use to possibly change. That they could come across the Faceless Man power as well. They just do it slightly differently, and that you have immortality. I mean, we don't know, for example, that, say, Melisandre, is it the ruby that's keeping her alive?
Is she
so long?
bathing in blood?
Or is she almost close to death because she's just really old?
Yeah.
I mean, in the show, we see her just go out in the field and die because we know that she is super, super old, but we don't know what people's kind of life expectancy is if you can stay alive through magic. I think it's certainly possible. I definitely think there is a huge possibility of doing that through blood magic or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. There's, I mean, yeah, you said it. I mean, you've got all sorts of disguises and stuff. And something that George does like to do is, like right now in the Quill and Tankard, we're like Jack and Hagar is back, essentially.
Right.
Like, he will end up taking someone else's identity, and he's trying to get a key inside the Citadel and stuff like that. And so people have tried to make the connection between that character that shows up there and who we knew Jack and Hagar was at the last time we saw him. I just typed in whether or not Roose Bolton, is a Faceless Man, to kind of see if people had maybe thought of that, because if he is, and if he does know that ability or that art or that technique or whatever, whether it's from his youth or from his many years, if he has been around if he is some sort of something undead that picked up on their art form, then maybe we need to consider that Roose is, when he's not, like we have to almost like keep track of him. You know what I mean?
Right.
Is he always in does he ever disappear? And then could he be reappearing as another character elsewhere with a different face? Is he wearing different faces?
Right.
That is something maybe to kind of look into. And you know what? I was not sure about this theory until I literally just typed in. So I often trust the a wiki of Ice and Fire, a Song of Ice and Fire, the actual,
I think there's an entire page dedicated just to this.
This theory.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. It is literally known as the Bolt-on theory. Some readers believe that Roose Bolton is an immortal being, possibly another that steals and wears other people's skins, and so more likely, and actually this is no joke. This is no joke, guys. There is evidence for it, but there is no direct evidence for this theory. Only circumstantial evidence. There's really no evidence against it. It's all just that the evidence that's for it is all circumstantial evidence. There's one quote that I found was kind of interesting when they describe Roose's appearance. Though past 40, Roose was as yet unwrinkled, with scarce a line to tell the passage of time. There was an agelessness about him, a stillness. So
Right.
And now one criticism I saw in some of the comments is that, like, why would George, bring up something like this in A Dance of Dragons, and why isn't there more evidence for this earlier on or whatever? And then someone's counter to that was, well, he still has 2 major novels to write, so maybe it does play in, and maybe there is some something to it. It seems more likely that he would know some of the Faceless Men arts, maybe.
Right. Well, I think that in trying to get, so I don't think that this, again, I don't think this theory is really that far out there. I think when people make a lot of ties to like vampires, I don't think vampires is something that we'll see.
Right.
But I do think it's safe to assume that, we see it with R'hllor and possibly the Great Other. You and I have talked about this a lot, Sir Ezra, that you can have similar abilities, but they're handled slightly different, right? So in the show, right, we know that the others, the White Walkers, can create whites. They bring people somewhat back to life, even if they're skeletons or whatever. And then you also have R'hllor bringing people back through, the Red Priestesses. So they're still brought back. They're different than they were before each way. Yeah. So it could be a case of different gods, different powers, even though they're similar. We have the Faceless Men who have the ability to change their appearance. We have glamours, which is a way to change your appearance. Same kind of outcome, just 2 different ways of doing it. So maybe there's other ways of doing it. We green dreams, green sight isn't necessarily something that's tied to anybody specifically. It seems like that's something that a lot of people can have. Warging is something, is a power we see throughout kind of
there's even differences between warging and skin changing. Yeah.
Right. And it's possible. It's also possible that it's Roose Bolton may not necessarily be in this kind of theory. He may not be around for like hundreds of centuries. He could just be 2 or 3, it could be one of those things that some people in the family have it and other people don't. You look at the Targaryens, Daenerys is able to withstand heat, fire in certain situations, whereas Viserys is not. And we don't know about Rhaegar, but whether he kind of had that ability but
right. So what you're saying is we also have evidence that someone like Bloodraven and others like Melisandre and whether it's Quaithe, who knows how old Quaithe is, and things like, there are rumors of shadow binders and all sorts of crazy stuff, that they live a long life, that they live a long time, and there's something that could be prolonging that. So now the extreme on this theory is that that it would be the 13th Lord Commander, the Night's King, and that it would be his son or his heir, or even him, or even he himself.
Right. Yeah. I think that part's a little stretched.
That's extreme.
Even the eyes. Some people view the eyes as, maybe he's an other or something, because he has like the really really pale blue eyes. I think that's a little out there too. But I definitely think there's enough. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it could just be Gur writing him to make him seem like a really creepy character. But, okay, keep in mind something else, too. In the books, he's still alive.
Yeah.
And, we talked a while back about how, the books and the show, as we've been doing on our Patreon series, the books and the show may go differently. So, think of at when the battle of... by the time Stannis shows up at Winterfell to battle Roose Bolton's dead.
Yeah, you mean in the show?
Ramsay had killed him. Yeah, Ramsay had killed him. So you've got to think about that. Whereas, so how in the books is Roose Bolton gonna die?
Could you imagine though? Because after reading this theory now, it's got me thinking like in the show, if George said, here's what's going to happen. Ramsay's going to end up killing his father. But really what it is that Roose Bolton stages his own death to take the identity of his son.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's what this theory is suggesting.
Right. Because I think unlike the show, where the show got less magical, I think the books are going to do the opposite and get far more magical.
Yeah, that is what has been so perplexing to me. I don't know. Maybe you almost wonder if we still have two major novels. Maybe we've reached the height of the magic in A Dance of Dragons, and maybe there'll be a tidbit of that at the beginning of The Winds of Winter or whatever, and then it's going to kind of decline and go back to more of a normal thing. Maybe that's what's going to happen. But there's been a huge uptick in it. You know, glass candles are burning now. Like Marwyn can see across great distances and stuff. Like it's radical.
It's the opposite. It's the total. It's the total opposite. A big theme in the books. I mean, the big theme is magic is on the rise.
Yeah,
and you know, so I think that it's so. I don't think it's entirely out of the realm of possibility. It could just be Gur, you know, as I said, writing him to give him those kind of vampire type appearances, just to kind of, you know, add flair to the character and just make him seem creepy. But it's not like Gur hasn't had anything. We have the Lostons. We talked about that Daniel Loston, who also was believed to kind of bathe in blood and things like that. And the Loston sigil is a bat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just in case anyone, so we do have some people who are coming from, you know, just being show watchers, and
absolutely,
this is a very different episode for us. So I wanted to kind of mention a couple things. So in A Dance of Dragons, if you're just starting with the Game of Thrones, great, cool beans. We kind of bounce around a little bit because we've read the books and it's just kind of a reread for us. So Roose Bolton, just so you know, is at Winterfell, and you know, he is plotting, he's scheming. He has sent Ramsay, his son, away with some of the, I think it's the Manderleys and the Freys, and they are headed towards Stannis Baratheon, who is between, there's a great manifesto out there, forget who this was, can't use, or somebody who's doing the whole rundown of what Stannis is thinking in his battle plans and prepping for the terrain and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, and Theon has reached Stannis and is talking to him and things like that. So yeah, that battle, and we talk about the difference between book and show, is going to be very different. And it looks right now, we have a strong, confident Stannis, and so to defeat this, I mean, if Ramsay dies in that scenario, then I mean, sucks for Roose,
right?
You know, who does he get to? If this is right, if this is true, and like if he loses his son, then he doesn't get a chance to kind of shift into him. You know what I mean? So now hold on, let me see him just real quick. Yeah, Roose, Ramsay, and the Bolton army remain at Winterfell, awaiting Stannis' host, which is slowed. Okay, so I take that back. So they're remaining at Winterfell, but they sent the Manderley force. That's right, and they sent the Freys. Okay. And this is a little bit of a Winds of Winter spoiler, so if you don't want any of that, spoiler, sorry. It's just a quick little nod here, because Stannis is getting information from Jane Poole and Theon Greyjoy, informing him that Roose has sent out the Freys and the Manderleys as well as Ramsay and his men, but kept much of his own strength behind Winterfell. According to Theon, Roose is keeping his own men back as a reserve, as he once did in the Riverlands, to weaken potential rivals. Stannis confirms that his supposed ally, Arnulf Karstark, has been secretly relaying information to Roose. And actually, there's a lot more to that. If you want to read that chapter, there's actually a lot more to what they do with the Karstarks and sort of that betrayal that's taking place there. But yeah, just that's a quick as to where the Boltons are and what's happening in Winterfell and stuff. There's a lot more to it, because Manderley is, if you've listened to any of the Grand Northern conspiracies, and you've looked into maybe some of who they're loyal to, and that a Stark should always be in Winterfell, and House Manderley they've already secretly sent Davos away to Skagos to retrieve Rickon. So you know that there's some loyalty there, and they don't like the Freys. They actually have to leave by separate gates, which is kind of funny. I even think, like, at one point, because of it's been a long time since I've read that, but I think Manderley gets like his throat cut, but he's so fat that it doesn't, like, he's bleeding, but he doesn't actually die or something. So anyways, I'll have to double check that. But yeah, so that's where Roose is at, and I don't know. I mean, really, when I think about this, is it going to be a big? Is it a big deal if he is a faceless man? I mean, a faceless man, unless he's moving around, assassinating people and stuff like that. If he's just sort of, if he is practicing the dark arts and he's trying to prolong his life, and maybe he's several generations old, that's a cool little nugget. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like, what does that do for the overall story?
Yeah, I think that's the what I see as the flaw in it. I think that there are tons of, I think it's what it is it's cool for world building at the end of the day. Even Varamir, Six Skins, I almost called him Varamir. When he's talking about skin changing, he uses the terms like slipping into one's skin and taking their skin, which sounds an awful lot like flaying. He specifically talks about how once, warging into Thistle and that being his second life. So, so there is that kind of narrative for it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
What it could end up being is something that comes up later in like a Duncan Egg novella, or, something else, something in the Fire and Blood Part 2, or, another World of Ice and Fire book. As you said, I think that it's, again, I think magically it is, there is totally validity to the theory based upon what we've seen in the books.
Yeah.
But narratively, just kind of for it to be Roose, again, I don't think we're going to get a chapter where we see him trying to cut open Ramsay and, then
mm-hmm.
and be a big player later on.
Yeah, I think some of the early descriptions too of Roose Bolton, like we just had in a Game of Thrones, and Catelyn is sort of describing him and how calculating he is, and how his silence says more than maybe his words, and they got to keep an eye on him. All of that is sort of foreshadowing the betrayal that will take place and stuff. So that's there. And then later on, though, you get some of this stuff as to just the oddness between Ramsay and the fact that Ramsay and Reek become a bit, somewhat of a big deal, and it becomes a major thread in the story. So it's like, it seems like it's one of those things that George, like a thread that he's laid here that isn't going to go anywhere, that he just did because it was kind of cool, and it's just layers.
Yeah, I mean,
he likes to throw people
entirely
off a
possible.
Bit. Yeah, so it's not that the reason we're even talking about it is because of all of the other cool things that Arya is experiencing, and that the Red Priests are doing, and we see even Quaithe when she is talking to Dany, and the guy is climbing the freaking fire ladder. It's like a year ago he wasn't able to do that, so magic is returning. It's the birth of her dragons and all that kind of stuff. So it makes us start to, this is what he does, this is why he's such a good writer. When we hear all that stuff going on in Essos and we see some of it kind of trickling over here into Westeros, we start to look at every freaking character and we say, okay, how could this be something magical, or how does all this influence the characters that we have in front of us? So, and then you really start to nitpick little lines like that, because there's not much evidence for it other than like he seemed, he says that he's being leeched and that makes him healthier. So maybe that's why he seems kind of ageless or whatever. And he doesn't eat a whole lot. That's something that's noted by Theon too when they're at the Great Feast at Winterfell. He's a picky eater, and he's also watching to make sure that Manderley is eating stuff as well too, so there's no poisoning taking place. Yeah, I don't know. So the bolt-on theory, my friend, it's not one I ever thought I would, look into much. And I mean, I'm glad that it's neat. It's definitely neat to kind of get more and to think more about Roose. I think the coolest thing that this did for me was to think more about Roose and his relationship to Ramsay,
right?
And why he's keeping him around, and
exactly, because
the plan is.
If you're Roose Bolton, I don't, in the show we see him say, well, now I have a new heir.
Yeah,
and so
that happens pretty quick too, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. I just, he's crazy. He's kind of weird. He's out there. I mean, the books. In the books he's like really ugly and stuff too. It's not like he is not like the who we see in the show. But I do think it is interesting, if Roose Bolton is clearly a pretty intelligent guy. And so why he decides to have Ramsay stick around for as long as he does is, as you said, I think it's really interesting, and I think that that's where what this theory points to and validates some of these people's arguments about the possibility, the idea of flaying him or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's an interesting quote. So some quotes by Roose, and we'll just see how this kind of see if this adds anything else to it. So Roose says, "People fear you," and he's talking to Ramsay, and Ramsay says, "Good." And Roose says, "You are mistaken. It is not good. No tales were ever told of me. Do you think I would be sitting here if it were otherwise? Your amusements are your own. I will not chide you on that account." So he's talking about like what he's doing to Theon and the taking the bits and the pieces and the flaying and all that stuff. But you must be more discreet. A peaceful land, a quiet people. That has always been my rule. Make it yours. So what's also interesting, if you wanted to buy into this theory a little bit, is that for him to take over and to be Ramsay, he would want Ramsay to be more like himself, to be more quiet spoken, to be more,
Right.
cunning and things like that. So he is trying here now to maybe teach him that there's a better way. You need to fall in line with the Bolton way, and you stick out too much. He's noticeable. People fear him, right? Roose likes to go unnoticed. He likes, especially if you're trying to pass from, to live on or to change skins or change identities, you really don't want to be noticed, and you want to slip into that person and it be not a major change. Because if you take Roose's personality, it's very different from Ramsay's. If he were to switch over, it's like all of a sudden you have a major shift in who Ramsay is. So look for that. If in Winds of Winter, all of a sudden we see a more calm, calculating, quiet-spoken Ramsay, you're like, well, holy crap. You know what I mean? Roose is not actually dead. He just took over his son.
Right.
That would be crazy.
Yeah.
So you got to look for their personality and their character to.
Do you think it's weird that
change.
Ramsay is using leeches and talking about the secret to a long life? Like that we get that line.
That's what I'm saying. Is that maybe like
we specifically get a line from him, because Gur does not waste lines.
Right.
And it's one of those things where every lines matter, and you can go back, as we've been doing in these Catelyn chapters and talking. It's crazy to look and see. I mean, if you were reading, if you read a Game of Thrones, right?
Uh-huh.
And you had just read the first book, and I think a lot of show watchers would be shocked, knowing nothing about the books, to find out. Wait, hold on a second. Catelyn Stark gets brought back to life, and she's like a zombie walking around.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you know what I mean? And then you see the lady, all of the references to Lady Stoneheart. Like her heart was cold, cold as stone. All the things it says in those early Catelyn chapters. I mean, Hodor.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's where I look at it and I say, the fact that those lines exist is just, knowing Gur's writing style, it could totally be something.
Yeah, it could turn into something, and it could just be a little kind of. It's one of those threads that maybe never needs to be explained, but it's almost like for the author, it's a hidden little nugget. Sort of like what I did there was I just had two characters switch identities, right? I this is there, and I can use it later if I want to, if the writing evolves. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be something like, we talk about is Jack and Hagar Syrio Forel, and maybe in the books, because obviously nothing happened in the show, nothing ever comes of it, but it's something that fans will speculate on forever. And that's all he wants.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's
right.
Neat, is that like some things never need to be told all the way. It's sort of like lay this little bit of foundation. There's a little bit of a rumor that that the 13th Lord Commander was a Bolton. Like Old Nan says it in her story, and things like that. So this is why you can kind of run wild with this, and there's really, and again, when you look up the theory, there's not a whole lot to sort of say, yeah, that's not the case. It's just sort of like, if you believe it, cool. There could be more coming up in the next book, but this is what we have, and it's unusual. Let's just put it this way. So his behavior, the having the flayed man as your sigil is interesting enough, and so there's fear in that. The leeching is interesting. Who else do it? Does anybody else?
The only other person who really uses leeches is Melisandre.
Okay, yeah.
Somebody who we also know has found some secret to long life.
Yeah. So maybe there is something in it. right? Maybe there is something. Maybe he
Right.
does have some type of sorcery or something up his sleeves or whatever. And, you know, Alt-Shift-X kind of even said, you know, look at where the Dreadfort is, you know, a little further east there in Westeros, could easily have got on a ship, you know, in his youth or whatever, and gone to the Free Cities or gone over to Bravos or Essos and what have you, and learned of these ways. So,
yeah.
interesting. Bolt on, my friends. Just bolt on.
Yeah. So, all right.
Wow.
Hey, it was fun. It was a fun little episode.
Yeah, it was. It was. And here's the thing. So since this was just sort of a fun episode and we were just having a good time, we actually have a very serious episode out there that I would love for folks to go listen to. When you're done with this, head over to Patreon. We have a sick series going there. Do we not?
Yeah.
Tom,
I think you and I talked for about 3 hours the other night
Yes.
on a massive part 1 of our massive Harrenhal series. It's kind of going to be the history of it and really why Rhaegar chose Lyanna and really what was all going on there. So we have that going over there on Patreon.
Yeah, it's huge. It was a lot of fun, and at one point,
Part 1 of 4.
Yeah, if you are one of our sworn swords, you will get the musing as well, where we really go back and forth about a shadow host, and I mean it is a heck of a lot of fun, and
a lot of history on Tywin Lannister as well.
Yeah. So it's really cool, and a part of that too is we have our own thoughts. We've always had our own thoughts on what has happened between Tywin and Aerys and the Mad King, but then we found several other theories of people kind of breaking down whether it's the magical elements or the political side of it or whatever it may be. There's a bit in there for everybody, and I think that's what's going to be really cool. So if you want that more serious episode, definitely go check that out. Now, I haven't done this in a while, so I want to give a quick shout out to all of our sworn swords, by the way.
Yeah.
We have quite a few, and so that tier is blowing up. They get a chance to be involved in Raven's Nest, and they get all the musings. They get all the podcast on Patreon, all the extra content. So, quick shout out here. So Sir Anonymous of House Anonymous, which I think is the most clever thing I've ever seen. Sir Austin of House Jeffords, Lady Chloe of House Swain, Lady Danisa of House O'Brien, Lady Dawn of House Watson, Lady Hannah of House Farmer, Sir Jake of House Jacobson, Sir James of House Nutter, Sir Geoffrey of House Wilson, Lady Jessica, Sir John, Sir Matt of House Zink, Sir Ralph the Dornish Wolf, Sir Samuel of House Wakefield, Lady Sarah of House Thompson, Sir Sean of House Brunos, Sir Joe the Grackle Knight, Sir Stephen of House Vilken, Sir William of House Lombard. So there you go. Just a quick little shout out to all this. So I might have butchered some of those, and I apologize. But
no, absolutely, yeah, it's a
it's cool because it's been it's a huge help, and we have a lot of those folks who are in there. By the way, to all of those folks who we just gave a quick shout out to. I am begging you to go listen to the episode that we just posted for you, and I also would love for you to give your comments down below on the Harrenhal theory and some of the speculation surrounding the tourney at Harrenhal, because Sir Matt and I will use that for next month's fuel going into part 2.
Absolutely,
and part 2 is pretty ridiculous actually. So we're really looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and also, should we talk a little bit about the kind of Patreon gift box that we're working on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah, so what we're going to do this time around is, we've done shirts for the past couple times. This time we actually have we've been working with a new artist. Our old artist, I don't know entirely what happened to.
We don't know if he died,
him or her. Yeah,
we have no idea.
And it's unfortunate because we really liked the artwork that we had, and it was kind of a really cool series going. But we have a new artist, and they kind of they're really good at kind of other areas, and so we've been working with them for stickers, and so we actually have some really super cool kind of throw on your laptop, throw on wherever you want, and they're going to be. I think they're going to be super, super cool.
We like them.
What we've been working with them on. So those will be coming soon. We're just kind of getting we're in the process of getting the preliminary kind of sketches in right now. So once we have more, we'll share a little bit more with that. But those are coming. So we had some people kind of ask about that. So that's going to be kind of the next gift bag, and I think they're going to be super, super cool.
Yeah, they are, and there's some extra little hidden nuggets that will be in there as well that we are not going to mention. But
you'll see some other cool swag when you receive your box.
Yeah, so check that out, and then the next run we also have already way ahead planned out our next T-shirt too.
Yep.
So
so that'll be the run.
Thanks, George.
That'll be the run after that, and hopefully, it's gonna be super cool. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, me too. So, all right, guys. Well, hey, thanks for entertaining us today. And letting us kind of just have fun with this episode, and safe travels to you, Sir Matt, as you head back west. Literally, with less than 24 hours, you'll be.
I'll be back.
You'll be back. You'll be out there, and we will continue on. We've got more Patreon content to record, and we will be back with the reread next week. We will have the Daenerys chapter, which is going to be it's bloody. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, we want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. In our next episode, we'll be discussing Chapter 61, Daenerys 7.
If you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com.
We will see you in a week, and remember that winter is coming.